Hi everyone, my name is Amal and I work for the St. Joseph County Parks, and I'm really happy to be with you today to talk about making art using a very unusual medium, bread mold. So to start with, what exactly is bread mold? Well, living things can be divided into a couple of really big groups that we call kingdoms. We're all probably familiar with the animal kingdom, that's what we're part of as humans, and also the plant kingdom. We're familiar with that one as well. Well, mold is part of a completely different kingdom of living things, the fungus kingdom. So molds are related to mushrooms. Now, members of the animal kingdom, like us, have to eat food or consume food in order to get energy. Members of the plant kingdom make their own energy from sunlight, carbon dioxide, and water using a process called photosynthesis. So they don't actually have to eat the way we do. Fungi, including molds, absorb nutrients from whatever they are growing in and around, whether it be wood, soil, bread, or many other different things. The part of the mold that we see is actually not the entire organism. So what we see growing on top of the bread is just basically the fruiting body of the mold. So it consists of little mushroom-like structures that look kind of like this. And this is where the mold produces something called spores. Spores are kind of like seeds because they produce more mold, but they're much smaller than most seeds and they just blow around in the air. Like I said, that's only part of the organism. If you see this stuff growing on top of your bread, by the way, this is a very close-up view obviously, but if you see this growing on top of your bread, you know that the bread itself is also full of the other part of the organism, which is basically its roots, or the equivalent of its roots. We call that the mycelium, and it's thready structures that go all through the bread, and that is how the mold is absorbing nutrients from what is around it. So if you've ever wondered, should I just cut off the moldy part of the bread and eat the rest of it? The answer is no, because the bread is probably full of the other parts of the organism as well. There are a couple of different kinds of bread mold. The most common one is called black bread mold, and it's usually got fuzzy green or blue patches which eventually become completely black or have black centers. Another kind of mold is called penicillium mold, and these are usually fuzzy greenish, grayish, bluish patches. Now, penicillin, which is a common antibiotic and is very helpful to humans, is made from penicillium mold. Penicillium mold is also used in the making of some kinds of cheese, like blue cheese. It gives it a very distinctive flavor. One other kind of mold on bread is called cladosporium, and this makes these big dark patches. And this is the stinkiest kind of bread mold, so you'll definitely know if you've got this one growing on your bread. In general, these molds are not very harmful to people. However, it's not a good idea to eat them, and they can be irritating, especially if you have allergies. So this piece of art that we're going to create is something that's going to have to get thrown away. You can't keep it around and save it for your grandchildren to see. So what kind of supplies will we need? They're pretty straightforward. We're going to need paper, a pencil, some paint, brushes, a cup for water. We're also going to need a blender and a piece of bread. And then to keep this artwork safe and to allow it to become as beautiful as it should, you'll need some kind of a pan or tote that either has a lid or else you can cover it with plastic wrap, one way or the other. So to begin with, I'm going to make a very simple drawing that's going to eventually be decorated with bread mold. I found that it works really well to do a drawing that includes spots. So I tried a mushroom with big spots on it. I tried a starry night sky with a big moon and stars. That worked really well. I also tried a fish with spots on it and a turtle with spots on it. I didn't like how those turned out because they ended up looking like an animal that had mold growing all over it, which was just kind of disgusting. So I'm going to go with the mushroom for right now. And it's just going to be very simple. You don't want anything particularly complicated. All right, so there's the top of our mushroom, the stem, and now I'll draw some spots on it. There we go, very straightforward. Now I'm going to add a little color. You're going to want to use tempera paints or watercolor paints, something non-toxic, and something pretty runny. You don't want anything thick, acrylic paints, anything like that I don't recommend. I'm just going to do 2 colors, keep it simple, but obviously you can make this as complicated as you want. I'll have a little water to rinse out my brushes in. And also maybe to thin out the paint a little bit. And we'll go ahead and fill in the color on the mushroom. The trickle-down effect is going to add a little interest, isn't it? All right, I think we'll switch to another color here. Add some yellow, make the spots yellow. And I'll make the stem yellow as well, even though it's got a red streak down it. All right, there we go. I recommend kind of going simple with this picture that you're going to draw. You don't want anything too terribly complicated. So now is where the bread comes in. Basically, we're going to mix bread and water in the blender to make a very thick paint made of bread. Now, I happen to have on hand a loaf of bread that doesn't have any preservatives in it, and I think that's probably going to be better than if there's a loaf of bread that has a lot of preservatives, because those might slow the mold from growing. So I'm going to rip up my piece of bread into some chunks. Add just a little bit of water, not too much. Can always add more if I need more later. Now we're gonna blend it up, probably on low speed will be plenty. Looks like we need a little more water. Now I'm going to blend it on high for a minute just to make sure all the little pieces of bread get chopped up as small as possible. I think that'll work. Now before using this bread paint, to decorate my painting with, I'm actually going to transfer this to a horizontal surface so all the bread paint doesn't just run off of it. So I'm going to lay it on the lid of my tote right here, just like this. Kind of scraping some of the little bits of bread down off the edge of the blender and down into the liquid, because I want them to be included as well. All right. Got it all nicely mixed, and I'm going to go ahead and pour some of this into my paint tray. Now I'm going to just add the mold to the spots on the painting, because that's where I want to see the mold growing to be the most interesting effect. All right. A little bit there. This is pretty juicy, so it is running around a lot on the painting, but that's okay. That'll just make the effect more interesting. All right, so my mold art is now ready to do its thing. So what I'm going to do is I am just going to put the tote upside down on top of the lid like this. And the effect that this has is it's going to keep my project nice and moist, which is the best conditions for mold to grow. Now, if you have a pan that you can cover with plastic wrap, that will work just as well. Basically, it's just important that it not be left open to the air where it can dry out. Now, about every day or every other day, you're going to need to open up your art project, take a spray bottle of water and just lightly spray it, or maybe even just spray around it so that there's still moisture in the container. You want to just make sure it's not, you're not going to soak it, but you just want to make sure that it doesn't dry out. And then you'll keep the lid back on. I recommend leaving this for about a week. You can check it every couple days and see what happens, see how long it takes your artwork to develop. After about a week of growing, this is what mine ended up looking like. All sorts of decorations showed up on my mushroom. I had a lot of fun with this. I wasn't sure what to expect. I hope that you'll enjoy it too, and that you'll make some very interesting bread mold art. Thank you so much for joining me today.